Hey everybody, RJ again, and today we're talking The Last Jedi, specifically that line in the title. Now, I've seen a few complaints about this line, and I want to clear up any misconceptions some people might have about it. Keep in mind that all my explanations are just my opinions and they're educated guesses, so none of it's official. Now, the biggest complaint I've heard about this line is that it makes the Jedi Order useless, since their very existence would cause the Force to create a powerful dark side user. It makes all the struggles of any previous Jedi kind of meaningless, since their very existence caused that struggle. But that doesn't have to be true. Let's start with the cheesiest answer I've got, and it's that Snoke is lying when he says it. Okay, hear me out. It's not as terrible as you might think. Although it's definitely not the best theory I have on this video. So, while this line may seem to explain why Rey is so powerful, it isn't the only possible explanation. A few weeks ago, Jon Solo, yes, I'm talking about him again, made a video with a pretty good explanation for just this question. Link to that video in the description. You should probably go watch that. No, really, I'm not going to summarize it. You'll be confused in this video if you don't. So, while I'm not going to summarize this theory, I'm going to add to it. In addition to Rey not having the old Jedi ways holding her back, I think she has something that really removes her limits when it comes to her Force powers. Most of the time, when people call Rey overpowered, they compare her to Luke in terms of training and Force potential. Well, yes, she has had considerably less training than Luke around the time of Empire, and that is the Luke I'm going to compare her to. There are several possibilities as for why this is. As I said before, there's what Jon Solo mentions in his video, and now there's going to be what I add to that theory, which is what each of them had heard about the Jedi and the Force prior to their training. Trust me, it's important. Luke, if he had heard any stories about the Jedi, would all be watered-down stories that have been censored by the Empire. Imperial propaganda that severely downplayed the Jedi's accomplishments. So, when he started to train to be a Jedi, he would be held back by all these preconceived notions about what the Jedi could and couldn't do. Hell, he didn't even seem to know what the Force was until Obi-Wan told him about it. He probably heard it mentioned, but never really explained until then. This is also true for Rey, with Luke explaining the Force to her, but what is different for her is that she has been told stories that were exaggerated in the opposite direction, with Luke's accomplishments overplayed. In the canon book, The Legends of Luke Skywalker, we hear several tales about Luke with questionable levels of truthfulness, all of which play up his abilities and powers. So, if Rey has been fed stories with Jedi being able to do all sorts of crazy, powerful things, she would start her Force training off thinking that next to anything is possible. So, she isn't held back as much as Luke was. Thus, she is more powerful. So if this is why Rey is more powerful than she appears to have any right to be, then Snoke's words can be discredited, and this line doesn't need to be true. Now I happen to believe that it is true, and that both his explanation for why Rey is so powerful and the one I just talked about can both be true. But if this works for you, great, Snoke is lying. On to the next idea, and it's that the Jedi didn't know about this. Now, Snoke has been around for a while. We don't really know how long, but at least since the time of the prequels. And in that time, he has seen the light and power, then the dark rise, then the light again, and the dark once more, and now the light again. So, it's safe to say that Snoke probably knows what he's talking about. Sorry, other theory. But why wouldn't the Jedi know about this? Well, they had been in power for at least 1,000 years, so it's possible that they didn't know that the Force did these switches of power. Now, we don't know anything about the Old Republic at this point, or maybe we do. But when it comes to the Sith and Jedi fighting, we have no idea how many conflicts there were, or how often they happened, or even how big they were. It's perfectly reasonable for the Jedi to not have noticed this trend, especially if they didn't live for however long Snoke did. They could just think that the Sith kept coming back and they need to be more prepared because they keep getting stronger. They don't necessarily need to know that it's because of the Force trying to balance itself out. Especially if the conflicts in the Old Republic were more spaced out than the ones that we're used to during the film trilogies. It could easily be that the Jedi simply don't know that there's a reason why the Sith keep popping up, or that they just don't notice the trend. Alright then, on to the last theory. So, if you don't buy that the Jedi wouldn't be able to sense the Force trying to balance itself out or something like that, how about this? They knew about this cycle, but they thought they had broken it. I mean, the Sith have been gone for 1,000 years. If the conflicts that they had had with the Sith of old had been more frequent instead of less frequent, like the previous theory needs, then maybe they simply thought it was over. Just think of how certain Mace Windu is that the Sith hadn't returned when Qui-Gon brought up the idea in The Phantom Menace. To the prequel Jedi, evil had been stopped, the cycle had been broken, the Force had found balance. And that balance was only the light. In fact, this could explain why the Jedi of the prequels were okay with the idea of balance being brought to the Force. We normally think of balance as being somewhere in between both the light and the dark, but for the prequel Jedi, that would mean just solely light, and that's why they're okay with Anakin bringing balance to the Force, because they don't think that includes any darkness at all. This makes Anakin the one who will end the Sith once and for all, and stop the cycle from ever happening again. I have to admit that when it comes to picking a favorite, I'm torn between these last two. The last one adds to the hubris of this Jedi during the prequels, and allows for many large conflicts with the Sith during the Old Republic. This would allow for them to figure out the balancing pattern that Snoke did, but the second one adds to the ignorance of the Jedi of old, and could possibly make for a story where a Jedi discovers the truth and tries to tell all the other Jedi, but he dies before he can, and then they find him with like a cryptic message on the floor written in blood or something. Could say like that famous Luke line, "It's time for the Jedi to end," and then they think it was the Sith who wrote it, so they dismiss it. Or he could realize it after a major victory against the Sith, and he tried to tell everyone, and then they banish him as a heretic. So then he forms his own Sith Order to destroy the Jedi, so no Force users would remain. Just throwing around ideas. Okay, that's it. Video's over. Follow me on Twitter, @star_warsgalaxy. Do all the YouTube stuff on the video, especially this one. I kinda need it. Leave a video suggestion if you want. I'll credit you. Thanks for watching.